County. And I'm going to have Amanda, my co-host, introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Amanda Woody. I'm the FCS agent in Pickett County.
So we're going to talk to you today about strawberries. We are going to record this session, so you should see something pop up on your screen that we are recording. So we're going to go through a presentation. We're going to talk about strawberry preserves and strawberry jams and jellies. And then we're going to talk about freezing strawberries. And when we get done with those presentations, then we'll have a time for questions. And so we ask that you hold your questions until the end. If you want to put it in the chat box, you are more than welcome to put your questions in the chat box. Otherwise, we'll open up our mics at the end of the session. We'll stop recording and you can ask any questions that you want to ask at that point. So we do ask that you turn your microphones off. We will go through the presentation and then we'll have a time for questions and answers. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to share my screen. So hold on just a minute here. All right, and you should be seeing the Extension Explorers Preserving Strawberries. So we're going to start off by talking about canned soft spreads. When we talk about strawberries in the spring, we want to preserve those so that we can use them throughout the year. And canned soft spreads are a great way to do that. There are basically 5 different products that you can make, and you can make all of these with strawberries. And so the first one is jelly. And jelly uses just the juice. It doesn't use any of the pulp. And it retains its shape, but it quivers when it's moved. So I think we're familiar with jelly. Jam is very popular for strawberries. It's probably one of the most common things that is made with strawberries. And this uses crushed small pieces of fruit in the gel, and it holds its shape, but it's less stiff than a jelly would be. The third one is preserves, and preserves are larger pieces of fruit that are suspended in a less thick gel. It's almost like a thickened syrup, and it uses either whole strawberries or very large pieces. And so a lot of what we kind of use jam and preserves interchangeably, but in the canning world, if you see a recipe for preserves, it's going to be a little bit looser than what we think of as commercial preserves. Marmalade is another product that we can make with strawberries. Marmalade usually uses some kind of a citrus fruit with it. It may have the zest or the peel in it, and that's suspended in a jelly as well. And then a conserve you might not be as familiar with, but a conserve is a combination of fruits. And a lot of times it has nuts or coconut or dried fruits added to it. Conserves make a really good sauce for like meat, like grilled chicken or grilled pork. And then you pour that over the top and it makes a really good combination. And there are recipes that use strawberries in those conserves as well. So all of these products are cooked as opposed to an uncooked freezer jam type product. These are cooked and they can be stored on the shelf. So you can store them into the year without having to put them in the refrigerator or the freezer. So let's talk a little bit about safety. So no matter what any of these products that you make, they all need to be processed before you store them at room temperature. So because they are high acid foods, they will be processed in a water bath canner or an atmospheric steam canner. So a water bath canner is basically a large pot. It has a rack in the bottom and a lid. So you don't have to have what is specifically called a water bath canner. If you just have a large, deep stock pot with a lid and you have a rack that fits in the bottom of that, that will work just fine. You just don't want your jars to sit on the bottom of it. And then an atmospheric steam canner is in the picture there below. And this is a relatively new product. It is not a pressure canner, it's a steam canner. And so you put water in the bottom and you boil it and it fills it with steam. And you follow the directions that are included with the atmospheric steam canner. We do want to talk about some outdated methods. We do not want to use paraffin wax on top of our jellied products or soft spreads. This used to be a really common practice, and it was the recommended method at one time, but that is not recommended anymore. Mold can get underneath that paraffin and spoil your jams and jellies, and you don't want to go to all that work and have that spoil. So we do recommend that you use a two-piece lid and that you process it rather than using the paraffin wax. Open kettle canning is where you cook your jam, you put it in the jars, put the lid on, and the residual heat from the jam seals the jar, but it does not sterilize the air in the top of the jar. It also does not, it will form a seal, but it's not a very strong seal. And so we don't recommend open kettle canning. And then inversion canning, you may have heard of people doing this where they put the jam in the jar, they turn it upside down, and they let the heat seal it. Again, you're not sterilizing the air in the jar, and so we don't recommend that. So make sure that you use a safety tested recipe. When we talk about tested recipes, it doesn't mean that they just taste good. It means that they've been put through a process where they test the center of the jar and the heat penetration to make sure that it comes to a safe temperature. And so those sources are any extension publication, the USDA Complete Guide to Canning, or the Ball Blue Book, or the So Easy to Preserve, which is also an extension publication. All of those have been tested, they are safe to go, and those are the recipes that you want to use. You don't want to use your grandmother's recipe, or I know that's kind of a tradition, but methods get outdated, and so we want to keep up and we want to make sure that it is a safe recipe to use. So don't look on Pinterest or other places for recipes. All right, so we do need to process our soft spreads, so let's talk about how we do that. So a water bath canner, like I said, is just a large pot. And so it takes a long time to heat the water. So the first thing you want to do when you're making soft spreads is to go ahead and fill your canner with water and let it start coming up to temperature. So you're going to fill it about halfway full, and you're going to bring it to a simmer about 180 degrees. We don't want it boiling when we put the jars in it. That can crack the jars. So we just want it a low simmer, which is about 180 degrees. You're going to wash your jars and your lids and your rings in soapy hot water and rinse them off. Most jams and jellies and soft spreads process for 5 minutes, so they're going to process for less than 10 minutes. Any product that we are making, that we're canning, that processes less than 10 minutes needs to be put into a sterilized jar. If it's going to process for 10 minutes or more, the jar is going to get sterilized in the processing. But if it's less than 10 minutes, we need to go ahead and sterilize those. So the way that we do that is that we boil it in water. We submerge the jars in water. We boil them for 10 minutes, and then they're ready to go. So the easiest way to do that is while you're heating the water in your canner, put your jars down in there, let them boil, and then back off on the heat and bring it back down to a simmer. And then as you get ready to fill your jars, you just remove those jars, pour the water back in the canner, and you have your sterilized jar ready to go. The lids you need to prepare according to the package directions. It used to be that the flat lids, you would put them in simmering water. The new lids don't always require that. And we have had some failures that we think are related to not preparing the lids correctly. So look on the box that you have. If it's a newer box, it may just say to wash them and rinse them and you're ready to go. If you have some older lids, you may need to go ahead and put those in simmering water. So follow the directions on the package. Then once you get your jam made, you're going to put it into your jars and fill it to a 1/4 inch headspace. And that's whether you're making a jam or a jelly or preserve. Any of these products are going to be a 1/4 inch headspace. That is the amount of space from the rim of the jar to where the actual product is. So it'll be a 1/4 inch down in the jar. Then you don't want any jam or anything on the rim of the jar. That will prevent the jar from sealing. So you're going to wipe the rim and you're going to put on the lid and the ring. The ring is just there to hold that lid against the glass. So you don't want to tighten it too much, just tighten it. We call it fingertip tight. So you're going to screw it down till it gives resistance and go about a quarter of a way past that. Then you load your jars into the canner. Make sure that you bring them straight up, load them straight down, and then cover your pot, bring it to a boil, and then you start your timing once it's at a full boil. When they're finished, you're going to uncover it and let it simmer down for just a minute. And then again, you're going to lift your jars straight up and out. And then you're either going to put them on a rack or on a towel on your countertop. You don't want to put them directly on the countertop. The temperature change may crack the jars, and you don't want that. So give them a little bit of protection and then let them sit undisturbed. And you need to check the seals before 24 hours. So don't move them around. The gel will set better if they're not disturbed. So just take them out of the canner, set them onto your towel or your rack, and let them sit there and cool down. So that is how we process all of our products. I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute because I want to show you a couple of things in processing. The first one, this is a canning funnel. And so you can see it has a large hole in the bottom of it. That is great for filling jars and not getting a lot on the rim of the jar. Another thing that is really useful in your processing, this is called a jar lifter. Let me see if I can get it correct in the camera here. And so this is a jar lifter. It squeezes, and the bottom part, your jar is down here, and then you can lift it out and over. So great for getting out of hot water. And then a couple of other tools. This, if you do have to simmer your lids, there's a little wand with a magnet in the tip of it there, and that will get your lids out. And then this will help you to judge your headspace. And it also gets bubbles out. It's just a plastic wand. You could also use just a spatula for that. Okay, I'm going to reshare my screen and go on with the PowerPoint here. So there are 4 ingredients in all of these products that create jellied products, is what we call them, or soft spreads. And so the first one is your strawberries. So strawberries do not ripen after you pick them. So choose just ripe berries for the best color and flavor in your product. And smaller berries are best that don't have hollow centers. If you are not adding pectin, you need to choose about a quarter of those that are slightly underripe and 3/4 of just ripe berries. And that is because it will give the best gel. Underripe berries are higher in acid, and so it makes a better gel. Pectin is a water-soluble fiber. It's found in most fruits in varying amounts. And so it is what causes the gel to form. And so strawberries are actually low in natural pectin. So if you make a jam without adding pectin, it has to be cooked for a long time, and it generally has more sugar added to it. So you have a choice. You can use pectin or you cannot use pectin. You can make products with added commercial pectin. This is usually made from apples or citrus fruits. And there are 2 major types. There is a high methoxyl pectin. This is what we consider just a regular pectin. You have to add sugar to it and make your jam that way. There is another type that uses calcium to set instead of sugar. And so if you're wanting to make low sugar or no sugar added products, then you need to use that special pectin. So make sure you get the right kind. They're generally 2 different kinds, 2 different colors on the boxes. So look at those very carefully, look at the labels, make sure that you know what you're getting. It will say low or no sugar on it if you're wanting to make that product. Otherwise, you need to use a regular pectin. It also comes in 2 different forms. One is a powdered pectin and one is a liquid pectin. Those are not interchangeable. So you have to have a recipe that is specifically developed for one or the other and use what it calls for. Acid is also required for the gel formation and for the flavor of it. It will taste better. So it could be the natural acids that are found in the fruit, or sometimes they add it in the form of citric acid or lemon juice to the recipe. And then the fourth ingredient that you need is sugar, unless you're using a no sugar added pectin. But normal jams and jellies use sugar as a preservative, and it helps to form the gel structure. So never, in a regular recipe, never use less sugar than the recipe calls for, or don't use an artificial sweetener to replace that. You have to have special recipes that are developed for that. All right, so let's walk through the process of how we make strawberry jam with a powdered pectin. This is probably the easiest way to make a strawberry jam. So you're going to wash and hull your berries and place them in a deep pot, and make sure that your pot is very deep. It is going to boil up a lot, and so you need a lot of extra room in the top of the pot, or it will boil over, and that will not be very good at all. So make sure it's nice and deep. You're going to crush your berries gently. You don't want to whip air into it. That can cause your fruit to float. And so you want to crush them gently. So put a layer in. The best way to do it, I think, is with a potato masher, and just crush those berries, put another layer in, crush them, and break them up into small pieces. Once you get all of those crushed and some of the juices released, then you're going to add the pectin. You're going to stir constantly as you bring it to a full boil. When it's at a full boil, which means that you can't be stirred down, a full boil means when you stir it, the bubbles don't go down. Then you're going to add the sugar, and you're going to continue stirring, and you're going to bring it back to a boil again and boil for exactly 1 minute. Once it's 1 minute, you take it off the heat, and then you're going to skim the foam. It will foam up quite a bit, and so you'll have foam on top. The foam isn't a problem other than it doesn't look good. So especially if you're making these to enter in the fair, you want to skim all of that foam off. Then you're going to fill your jars, leave a 1/4 inch headspace, wipe your rims, just use a damp paper towel and wipe the rims off, and then you put your lids and your rings on and process. You can also make strawberry jam without any added pectin. And so you just have to cook it for a long time. So you're going to wash and hull your berries, put them in a deep pot again, and crush them gently. This time you're going to add sugar. So there's really basically 2 ingredients in a long cooked strawberry jam, which is your strawberries and sugar. You're going to bring it slowly to boiling to dissolve the sugar, to make sure that it all gets dissolved. Then you're going to turn the heat up, and you're going to boil it rapidly. And you're going to boil it to the gelling point, which is 220 degrees. And with strawberries, this is going to take probably 20 to 40 minutes. I made some the other day. It took about 40 minutes of stirring. So you have to stand there and stir and make sure that it doesn't scorch on the bottom. So it takes a little bit more time. The best way is to use a candy thermometer and bring it up to 220 degrees. If you don't have that, you can pour a little bit out on a saucer and put that in the refrigerator. Take it off the heat while you're doing this, put it in the refrigerator, and if it sets within a couple minutes, then you're ready to go. Once you get to that point, you're going to remove it off the heat, and you're going to skim the foam and put it in your jars like the other one. So it's up to you if you want to make strawberry jam with pectin or without pectin. People have varying opinions. Some people say the strawberry jam with pectin doesn't cook as long, so it has a fresher flavor. The strawberry jam that does not have pectin is a darker color and has more of a caramelized flavor almost to it. If your jam does not set up, you can remake it. And so you need to wait at least 24 hours to see if it sets up. There are a few things that take up to 2 weeks. This really doesn't apply to strawberry jam, but some plum jellies or jellies that are made with bottled juices, it can take up to 2 weeks for the gel to set. But with strawberries, you should know within 24 hours whether it's going to set up or not. So if it is not set, then you need to follow the directions for remaking it depending on the type of recipe that you used, whether you used a powdered pectin or a liquid pectin or cooked recipe. So the directions are found at the National Center for Food Preservation website, or in the Ball Blue book, or the So Easy to Preserve book. So any of those places. It's also on our webpage that we're going to tell you about at the end here. So some general tips when you're making jams and jellies and these types of products. Don't soak your strawberries when you're washing them. They will absorb water and you don't want that. So just rinse them under running water. Make single batch recipes. You don't want to double any kind of a jellied product. And you can safely add up to 1 teaspoon of an herb or another flavoring. So if you want a strawberry vanilla jam, for example, you could add a teaspoon of vanilla flavoring. Or if you want to do strawberry basil, you can add a teaspoon of finely chopped basil to it. But you don't want to add any more than that. You don't want to add anything else to the recipe that it doesn't call for. There are 6 tablespoons of powdered pectin in 1 box. So if you're buying in bulk, that will give you an idea. And you only want to make enough jams or jellies for a few months. The quality will deteriorate after a little while. They are perfectly safe as long as they're sealed and they don't have any problems. They're safe for up to a year, 12 months, but they will lose a little bit of their flavor and their color after a few months. Make sure that you don't disturb the jars for 12 hours after processing. Use a deep pot so you don't boil it over. And I found it really useful when I was stirring, if you're cooking your jam for that 40 minutes. Use an oven mitt. I used a silicone oven mitt to avoid the steam, because there's a lot of steam that comes off of it. And that will help you not get burnt from the steam or the hot sugar. Sometimes when it's boiling, it will bubble up a little bit. So some tips for making jelly. So when you're extracting the juice, you only want to use enough water to keep the strawberries from scorching. You don't want to add too much water to them. You only cook, for strawberries, you're only going to cook that fruit about 1 to 2 minutes to get the juice flowing. And then let the juice drip through the bag. You're going to use a jelly bag or cheesecloth. And you don't want to press it through there. If you just let it drip, it will make the clearest jelly. Boil jelly rapidly. You don't want it to simmer. That actually destroys the pectin if you simmer it. It keeps it clearer as well. So boil it rapidly and then pour it quickly into the jars. If you pour it slowly, it makes air bubbles and it doesn't look as pretty. A few things on jams to prevent separating. So separation occurs when the fruit floats on top of the gel. It doesn't harm it at all. It just doesn't look as good. So to prevent separating, use ripe strawberries. Crush them gently. Don't put them in a food processor. Don't crush them up rapidly and get a lot of air in there. You want to cook it long enough, but not too long. And after cooking, you can gently stir off and on for about 5 minutes before filling the jars. And that may help to get the fruit mixed in with the gel and let it set up just a tiny bit before you put it in the jars. After processing and the lids have already sealed, then if it starts to separate, you can turn it upside down at that point. The jar is already sealed, so it's not an issue of inversion canning. But once the jar has sealed, then you can turn it upside down and then back upright after another hour. And that will just help to mix that fruit in as it sets. If it is separated, it's not a problem. Just stir it when you open the jar and it'll be fine to use. You can prevent the foaming by adding about 1/4 teaspoon of butter when you're cooking the jam, and that will keep it from creating quite as much foam. And then stir over low heat until the sugar is dissolved, and then you want to boil it rapidly. And that will make the jam a little bit clearer, just like the jellies. It'll make the gel a little bit clearer. So there are lots of recipes that you can use that are tested. So I went through and looked for all of the tested recipes. So you can make jelly with a powdered or liquid pectin. Rhubarb is a really good combination with strawberries. They're in season at the same time. So there's a strawberry rhubarb jelly on the National Center for Home Food Preservation website. It will also be on our website, a link to it. And it's in the So Easy to Preserve book as well. As far as jams go, you have a long traditional cook, you have powdered pectin, you have liquid pectin, rhubarb jam, a kiwi. There's a strawberry kiwi jam that is an approved recipe. And so if you want something a little bit different, you can use one of those. And then there's also a low or no sugar jam that is made with the pectin in the Ball Blue Book, and a cherry berry jam that is made in the Ball Blue Book. With preserves, there are recipes that do not use any pectin, and then there's a recipe that uses powdered pectin. In the Ball Blue Book, you have a strawberry lemon marmalade and also a spring conserve. And the spring conserve is a combination of different fruits, and it has some nuts and coconut in it. So really good recipe. So lots of ways that you can use your strawberries to make soft spreads. We are going to send you, we're going to email you a link. We have set up a website, and it has links to all of these recipes. It has links to how to use a water bath canner. It has videos on it. One of our other agents did a wonderful video demonstrating how to make strawberry jam with pectin added. And so the links for all of that will be on the website that we will email you the information. So we hope that you go to that and that you look up that information. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to turn it over to Amanda Woody, and she's going to talk about freezing strawberries.
All right, thank you, Whitney. We are going to talk about freezing strawberries, and I will get my screen shared. Okay, so freezing strawberries is a great way to be able to use your strawberries throughout the year. And there are several methods to freezing strawberries, but today we're going to talk about the sugar pack method. This uses a quart of strawberries and 3/4 a cup of sugar. So you need fresh, fully ripe, firm strawberries with a deep red color, and 1 quart of strawberries is about 1 1/3 pounds or 6 to 8 cups. And so to fill your quart container, you'll need that much, as well as the sugar. The sugar doesn't actually preserve the strawberries, the freezing process does. The sugar helps to keep the frozen fruit a nice texture and a nice color. And since the sugar doesn't preserve the strawberries, it can be reduced or omitted, or you can use artificial sweeteners. So you're going to start by preparing your strawberries. Carefully remove the hull and stem after they've been washed, remembering not to soak your strawberries. You're going to just remove it with a paring knife and then cut around the stem in a small circle, leaving as much of the strawberry as possible. Remove any bruised or damaged spots as well. Rinse them again if needed, just to remove any pieces of hull that may have stuck to your strawberry, and then slice them in half lengthwise. Try to make each size as equal as possible. And your strawberries can be whole or crushed. Next, place the trimmed and halved strawberries into a clean mixing bowl and add the sugar, 3/4 of a cup per quart of berries, and using a clean spoon or spatula, mix the sugar into the berries, combining thoroughly, but be careful not to damage the berries. Then you're going to give some time for the juices to form. So once they've all been mixed, you're going to give them about 15 minutes for the sugar to dissolve and the juices to form, and then make sure there are no sugar crystals left on the strawberries, the bowl, or the mixing spoon. Pack the strawberries in rigid plastic containers, plastic freezer containers, or in plastic freezer-safe bags. Leave enough headspace in a plastic container that's going to be 1/2 inch for pint size and 1 inch for quart size, or in plastic bags approximately 1/2 inch. And after you've filled the strawberries in the container, add any remaining juices. This helps to keep the strawberries packed in the juice and helps to preserve the texture. Wipe the rim of the container to remove any excess juice. Use a damp paper towel to wipe them. And this will help your lid secure tightly so that there's not any air that gets inside and helps the quality of your food in the freezer. Then label the container or the bag with the date, the name of the product, the form of the food, if it's whole or crushed, and the number of servings. Seal the container, releasing all the air, and then make sure the edges are sealed tightly before freezing. Place your packaged strawberries in the freezer in an upright position. Keep your freezer at 0 degrees Fahrenheit or below, and some freezer manufacturers actually recommend that you turn the freezer down to -10 degrees or lower when you're freezing large amounts of food, and it's a good idea to check your manual to see what's recommended. And if you're not sure what temperature your freezer is at, an appliance thermometer will help you determine if your freezer is at the proper temperature. There are other methods of freezing strawberries. The syrup pack, during this process, you create a syrup mixture by dissolving sugar in lukewarm water. You can do unsweetened packs, the dry pack or the tray pack. And this process is good for small whole berries. You pack the fruit into containers and seal and freeze. Or during the tray pack method, you freeze your strawberries on a tray, and then once they're frozen, transfer them to another container to store in the freezer. And this is good when you need to get, when you don't want to use all your strawberries at one time. And then in addition to these, we also have the unsweetened, the pectin syrup, so we can use a pectin syrup mixture to freeze them as well. Freezer jam is very popular with strawberries, and some recipes that are recommended are the uncooked berry jam from the National Center for Home Food Preservation website or the So Easy to Preserve publication. A strawberry jam using artificial sweetener can be found in the So Easy to Preserve publication. And then there's a low sugar jam on the Fresh Preserving website. You can store your freezer jam in the freezer for 1 year or up in the refrigerator for up to 3 weeks. And there are several different brands of pectins, and I've noticed that these different brands of pectins will have slightly different instructions as well. So always check the brand of pectin if you're making the freezer jam to see what is recommended with that brand. And some freezing tips for foods in general: freeze them as quickly as possible to keep the size of ice crystals small. And as they're freezing, leave some space in between the packages so air can circulate. And then once they're frozen, you can move the packages so they'll be close together and to help keep them frozen best. Fruits and vegetables maintain their quality in the freezer for about 8 to 12 months. And after 12 months, they're still safe, they're just lower in quality. And check your freezer manual to see how much unfrozen product can be frozen at one time. That's another good tip to get out that manual and check to see what your manual says, and it may have a recommendation on the amount of food that needs to be frozen at one time. And we're also going to mention drying strawberries and making strawberry fruit leather. Strawberries are an excellent fruit for making leather and a good fruit for drying. Drying is one of the oldest forms of food preservation. It removes the moisture from the food so that the bacteria, yeast, and mold can't grow and spoil the fruit. And there are several ways to dry foods. When you're drying strawberries, they do not need to be pre-treated, and they take about 24 to 36 hours in the dehydrator. And then fruit leathers are made by pouring pureed fruit onto a flat surface for drying. And strawberry fruit leather takes about 6 to 8 hours in a dehydrator and up to 18 hours in the oven. And these are other good ways that you can preserve your strawberries to help them last a little bit longer. And there are specific instructions for the drying strawberries and fruit leathers on the website that Whitney talked about, as well as the freezer jam recipes, links to the freezer jam recipes and freezing strawberries as well. And then some general resources that you will be receiving later. And that's the end of the freezing strawberries. So I think that we are ready to stop recording.